Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to get started and wanted to briefly give some logistics first and foremost. But I'm Felicia Bell from the NCAT Gulf States Regional Office, and we have such a good webinar today. So my co-worker Lee Rinehart will be discussing with us how to make a grazing plan and then the benefits of planned grazing. So we definitely, that is a big issue with a lot of livestock producers. I felt like we need to tap into that subject again. We have many, many resources on our ATTRA website, which is attra.ncat.org. But again, sometimes we get a little hiccup when we're trying to plan for our animals, regardless of what livestock it is. And so today, Lee will move into that, share a little story and a brief history about his expertise, and then he'll move right into the topic itself. Lee, you can take it away.
Very good. Thanks, Felicia. I'm really happy to be here today and talk about one of my favorite subjects. First of all, just a little about me. I'm Lee, and I am Felicia's co-worker. I work out of the Northeast region, and I have experience grazing just pretty much all around the country, right? I've lived in Texas, Montana, and now Pennsylvania, and I've been able to work with NCAT for the past 18 years doing livestock programming. So, kind of a story of why this is important. Grazing planning came to my eye back when I was a cooperative extension agent in Texas back in probably about 1998 or so. Because a lot of the people that I was working with down in Southeast Texas, in the Piney Woods region and the Gulf, kind of where the Gulf Coast meets the Piney Woods, a lot of cattle production down there. And what I was always noticing is, ranchers and grazers have a hard time of really maximizing the use of their pasture, right? I mean, certainly we have weather events, right? That can, if it doesn't rain, you're not going to have a lot of forage growth, right? Things like this, and so we're always kind of battling this low forage productivity type of paradigm that we found ourselves in. And what I also began to notice was that really it comes because we don't plan out how we're going to allocate that forage resource to the number and the kind of livestock that we have, right? I'm sure most of you have seen, and I grazed before, and I've had pastures that are just destroyed and wondering how can I do this better. But a lot of times we see a pasture that has a lot of stubby grasses with a lot of weed stalks sticking up, and we're wondering, what in the world, how can I maximize this pasture situation here so that I don't have to feed hay all the time, right? Especially in the winter, but I've seen it happen in drought periods in the summer as well. Well, with grazing, with having some type of a grazing plan, we can kind of forecast what that productivity is going to be, and then really developing a systemized way of allocating that resource over time to a specific number of animals so that we don't overgraze, so that we can actually have some grass left in the pasture after we move the animals off. And movement is the key, right? Movement is the key of actually getting those animals on that pasture at the right time, keeping them there for the right amount of time, given how many we have and how much they're eating, and then moving them off of that pasture to another one that is ready for them for an adequate amount of time so that plant can regrow to its full potential again, right? And when I say that, I mean full recovery. We want those pastures to rest so that they can come into full recovery. Okay, and one of the ways that I'm going to kind of show this today is through a plan that NCAT wrote with the Piney Woods School. Gosh, I was looking, Felicia, was that 13, 14, 15, somewhere around. I mean, it was back there, right? But it's still around and it's still being used, and it's really kind of cool. But I'm going to share my screen because I do have a PowerPoint that I want to show you. And I will do that, and I will do that. Okay, so here we are. This is the I'm going to kind of showcase the Piney Woods Farm Plan, what we're thinking when we did it, and then what I'd like to do is discuss throughout the next several, I don't know, half hour, 40 minutes, whatever we have here, kind of like what a grazing plan is based upon the Piney Woods plan that we wrote, how to start thinking about writing a plan, developing a plan so that you can allocate those pastures and have grass all year long. Seriously, lots of producers are able to do this. And then I'd like to kind of bring it back to why. Why is this important? In addition to just having enough forage, there's also a lot of other good reasons why having a grazing plan in place can benefit you and your operation. So let's just take a look at the land base right now of Piney Woods Farm. Felicia, what is the town where the farm is located? I know it's kind of like, is it like east of Jackson?
No, it's south of Jackson.
South.
Yes, and it is in the Rankin County area of Mississippi,
Okay.
central Mississippi.
Good, good. So most of you are probably very familiar with this ecology. I actually grew up in southeast Texas. It's very similar with respect to the humidity and such, and a lot of the grasses and such. But what we found when we went out there, we walked the land and we kind of developed a rudimentary grazing plan which is really a point of departure. It's a place to start, right? Any grazing plan is going to be some place you're going to start with. You want to know, how do I get started with this? So you develop out a plan, but you realize that plan is probably going to shift and change based upon many factors that you can probably imagine: animal numbers, weather, all kinds of things. And your marketing, your market, such like that. So that can change. But the first thing that we did whenever we got out and developed this grazing plan was we made an assessment of the land base. We did a pretty thorough resource assessment, what was there. And what we found, we looked at the acreage, we looked at the forage condition, all of the infrastructure, livestock handling facilities, everything that is going to be needed. And we said, is this enough, in order to do, fulfill the goals of the Piney Woods Farm managers, right? So that was kind of the whole thing. Here's what we're working with, right? We found that there's 65 acres of lower pasture and about 42 acres of upper pasture that was really in a weedy condition that needed some renovation. But overall, as I was doing my assessments, I kind of figured that on a good year, you could probably look at about 3,000 pounds per acre of forage productivity. That's dry matter on average. Some years would be lower and some years would be higher. It's a good idea to have a kind of an estimate of how much forage that you're going to have out there, because animals are going to eat so much, right? And like a cow is going to eat about 3.5% of its body weight per day. That can be anywhere, depending upon the size of the animal, from 25 to 40 pounds a day. Usually it's around 30, 32, something like that, pounds of dry matter forage per day. And if you know how much you're producing per acre, then it helps you to kind of allocate how many animals you can actually put out on the pasture, right? And later, I'm going to show you some resources and tools that'll help you kind of estimate that dry matter productivity. Another thing that I saw out there was that there was a pretty good population of forage species out there, right? Saw a lot of hay grass, and there's some Bermuda. There was a lot of forbs that sheep and cattle both will graze whenever they're in their succulent vegetative stages. I saw some weeds. There was definitely a kind of a moderate weed infestation there, but nothing that really concerned me, right? Because whenever you establish a good grazing plan, what you'll find is weeds tend to not be so much of a problem anymore, right? So that's another good reason to have a grazing plan. I did see that there was a low composition of legumes in the pasture. And that may have been because of the continuous grazing system that they had, where animals stayed on a pasture for a very long time. So whenever that happens and we have animals on a pasture for a long period of time, anywhere from weeks to months to even a year, those animals will preferentially eat those palatable species that they like, right? And as soon as it begins to regrow, they'll come back and they'll eat it again. And that tends to diminish those plants, right? It doesn't have chance for that root system to gain ground and for the leaves to photosynthesize and for it to grow to full maturity, because it just keeps getting shunted back and back and back. And I assumed that may have been what happened with the legumes. I would have expected to see something like white clover, right? And I didn't see very much there. They did have some good facilities, right? There was some standpipes they had for the well water. We realized that if they had 26 animals out there, they would need about 500 gallons a day in the summer and 300 in the winter. And so we assessed, flow rates and things like that. Do they have the capacity to deliver that kind of water? And then thinking in terms of like, what kind of water system would we set up if we were to start to subdivide those pastures so that it was economical, but that it divided that water up into those paddocks so that you get full utilization. Remember, the animals have to have water at all times. And if limited water for drinking for an animal on a pasture system can be a limitation, right? For the full exploitation of that pasture for what it's worth, right? The fencing was in good condition. And I saw that, given it was a 5-foot field wire all around the perimeter, was really suitable for just about any type of grazing you want, certainly for sheep and cattle, right? So that was the basic. I did an assessment, so okay, here's what we're working with, right? And now I kind of know where we need to go from here, right? So just in thinking about their grazing plan, this is a map of the pastures at the Piney Woods. And these lower ones here by the road, by Route 49, pastures 1 through 8 were in the best condition. Those were typically grazed more conventionally. Animals were put out for a longer period of time, and then they would move them around now and again. But it was pretty much maybe, if I can remember right, probably divided into 3 big pastures, right? What you see right here with these subdivisions is not what it was whenever I got there, right? So what we did was we said, okay, well, how can we best utilize this? Thinking in terms of putting the animals on the land at the right time, leaving them there for just enough time for them to get good grazing and they don't take the grass down too low, and then moving them off to another paddock so that grass from which they just left will be able to fully regrow and express all of its potential. So what we decided to do on this lower portion was to divide those big pastures into 8 smaller paddocks. Now, each one of these are probably about 4 acres in size, right? And we thought, okay, we'll put the whole herd in each one of these. And I knew that I wanted to have about a 30-day rest period on average. Now, of course, that rest period can change, right? Whenever it's droughty and you're not getting an awful lot of rain, and the forage growth slows down, I want to have a longer rest period, right? Give those grasses more chance to regrow. So I may have a 45, 50-day, even a 60-day period, right? It can happen. But in the spring, it may be 25 days, but then I'm going to increase that rest period as the season progresses. So what I thought we would do with this herd in this situation was to divide these into these paddocks and then begin in either paddock 1 or 8, and then just move them about every 4 days for a 4-day grazing period. So after that rotation is accomplished and they get back around, that pasture that they started with has had about 30 days of rest, right? So you can see that you can manipulate the amount of rest that the pasture will go through by manipulating For instance, the size of the paddock or how long you're actually grazing in that paddock, right? I would like to stay below 4 days. At about 3 or 4 days, after about 3 or 4 days, after a plant has been grazed, it starts to regrow, right? And then so there might be a propensity for the animals to go back to a plant that they've already grazed and graze it off, and then that will kind of send that pasture plant kind of on a downward spiral if that's continued for very long. So I want to try to keep the grazing period as short as possible, but in order to make this, to give myself my 30-day rest period, I figured about 4 days of grazing would probably be good for this situation. But then we said, well, then how do we take this up a notch, right? We're gonna start with this 8 paddock system. I know a lot of practitioners have told me that really you get the best benefits from some type of rotational grazing whenever you have more paddocks. Like 15 or more, right? 12, 15, even 20 paddocks, right? Because the more paddocks you have, the more control you have, the more rest periods that you can heighten those rest periods, right? You have a little bit more control, right, of what's going on. So, we decided that this is a good way to start. This is a good way to learn the system, learn how the animals are adapting, learn the animals will start to adjust to the movement regime every day, like every fourth day is going out there, opening a gate. They're going to start to know what's happening. There's another paddock of fresh grass. They're ready to go. Alan Williams was down there with us one time and we did a field day. And one of the things that he always says, that I just love this, it's very true, and I used to do this as well. He says that that moving cattle in the morning or the evening or whenever you are moving into another paddock is an excellent time to just really pay attention and watch the cattle. Get out there with them. If you're rotating them every several days, you're out there with them. You can observe what's going on. How are they doing? You can look at them. Are they getting enough gut fill? Are they thriving? Are they active? What's their hair coat like? Is anybody sick? Are they calving? Are there any issues I need to worry about? Is somebody not here? Is there another old girl that's laying out in the paddock and she just hasn't come up? Why? So I can look and I can count them. I can look at them as they pass through. So whenever you first start off with a rotational system, you're learning, the animals are learning, and it's a really, and you don't want to rush yourself. You really kind of want to get to know your system and adjust it. If that's too many paddocks, come down a little bit, right? If they're not divided enough because the herd is too big, make your paddocks a little bigger. But it's just an opportunity to observe and see what happens, right? After you've been doing this for a while, you may be thinking, well, then how do I take this to the next level, right? Like how do I get even better forage utilization out of this pasture? And that's whenever we put in this idea of a 16 paddock system. So what we did here was we laid out a part of the lower paddocks. It was probably like paddock 3, 4, and 5, and 6. And we divided those into about 2-acre paddocks, right? Anywhere from 1 to 2 acres, each one of these paddocks. And these paddocks would be divided by poly wire, right? Like a poly wire with an electric element in it, and just a fence wire, right? A single wire. You can use 2, but if cattle are really adapted to these electric fences, 1 wire is really all you need. And you can divide them like this. You can set them up and divide them, or you can build the paddocks as you go. Starting in paddock 1, maybe a couple of days later, you're moving the cattle to paddock 2, and you can actually just use the same wires and just build the paddocks as you go. Laying it out like this on paper gives you an idea of how you're going to do it, right? So in this case, we thought we could actually, on the same forage base, even smaller, remember, we're not using all of the paddocks here that we had before, we could increase from 26 to 75 beef cows, right? If our forage productivity was running on at the way it should, right? We have good rest period, we have good regrowth, and we have enough water. We could increase the number of animals that are out there. And we do that by decreasing that grazing period to about 2 days or so, while keeping that recovery period at about 30 days. And then so you'll see that I just added more paddocks in there in order to maintain that. If I took it to 3 days, that would increase that recovery period even more. So you see how you could like adjust your grazing period for how long you want that recovery period to be. If it's really droughty, that recovery period should be longer. Just always remember that, right? A lot of times we're tempted to speed up whenever it stops raining because we don't want them to be on the paddock too long. But what that does is it gets us in the hind end because we don't have enough time for the grasses to actually recover. They need more time. So that's kind of a way of scaling up, you know. And again, all this occurs over time and with observation and adaptation, a learning process both for you and your animals, right? And you'll also notice it's a learning opportunity for the plants that are out there. Whenever this type of a system is introduced, what we see within 2 to 4 years is we have noticed a shift in the plant population, right? We see clovers come in where we may not have seen them before. We even see native species coming back where we haven't seen before. All that stuff is in the seed bank. So one of the ways that you can definitely over time renovate your pastures, get better quality forages in there is through that magic of animal impact that comes about by having a planned grazing system, putting animals on a small paddock for a short period of time, moving them and giving that grass enough rest to come back. We see all kinds of cool things happening. Okay, so time check. I need to make sure that I don't go over because sometimes I can ramble on. So as you're doing this grazing plan and as you look back to the example from Piney Woods, 3 key questions come to my mind, and 3 key questions I think should be on the mind of every livestock producer who grazes their livestock and wants to have really productive pastures. And that is, number 1, when should the livestock arrive? How long should they stay there? And when should they return? Okay, just kind of reiterating the whole, process there that we did on the grazing plan for Piney Woods. So in answering these questions, it's good to kind of look at, how grasses grow, what the stages of grasses are, when we should, at what stage should the grasses be whenever we put them on there. And also something that really drives, how long we stay on a pasture is like how grazing affects plant and root growth, right? So this is a little graphic, and some of you may have seen this before, but this is old school stuff back from 1955. And the reason why I always still use this graph is because it holds pretty true even now. This is some old research and about some basic principles of plant growth that we rely on as grazers. And what this is saying is that on the far left side is the amount of above ground biomass, right? All of the plant, leaves and stems that is removed by grazing. The middle one is based upon how much was removed, how much root growth is stopped, right, after 3 days, right, of grazing. And then on the right, we have the number of days until those is you look at where it says 50% of the above ground biomass removed. So if the animals are out there and they take down half of what's out there, what we see is that about 2%, only 2% of that root growth is stopped by day 3 after that clipping or grazing. That's not much. That's negligible, right? And the roots will begin growing almost immediately. So you may have heard the old adage, take half, leave half. A lot of people say that's a good way to do things. And I think it's a good place to start. Thinking in terms of whatever grass you have out there, and think of it in density, right? The whole density, not just height, but how dense the sward is, how dense that grass is. go out there, and whenever the animals have removed about half of that through grazing, if you move them to another paddock at that time, the roots have not stopped growing. In fact, they are still regrowing, and it doesn't cause a significant impact to that pasture at all, right? However, if you were to take about 60% of that biomass, now you have a 50% reduction in the root growth underneath the ground. And think of what that does in terms of providing the water and nutrients to those plants, right? It starts to stunt them, right? It takes longer for them to recover. And then if you go up to 80% removed, now you have cut off, all root growth, right? And that root growth is not going to start regrowing until about 2 weeks later. So you can see here where a system where you have continuous grazing, animals on the same pasture for a long period of time, it starts to make sense why sometimes they look like a pool table with weed sticks sticking up, right? Because we have basically shut down root growth by that. If we would just take about 50 or 60% of that and then move them, we are going to have a lot better chances of having a productive paddock. They're going to regrow. And then if you have a 30-day rest period, 45-day rest period, whatever, by the time you get back to that pasture, it's going to look like it did in the spring. You're going to be up there at this phase 3 of growth, which is like this beginning of the reproductive period at the end of the elongation period. That is the perfect time to put livestock onto a pasture. The elongation period, of course, that's that time period whenever the stems are starting to get are starting to shoot up. You may or may not have a flower yet, or it may be in the boot stage where you see the little grass seeds are kind of wrapped inside of a sheath. At that period of time, if you look on the graph on the left, the pasture quality, as indicated by the dotted yellow line, is starting to go down a little bit because you're getting into reproductive stage. The plants are becoming more lignified. There's more fiber there, right? More carbon. But you're still up there with your pasture yield. That where the pasture yield meets the pasture quality is a really good sweet spot to hit it with grazing, right? It's well established. You're not going to do any damage to it unless you leave them on there forever, right? So that's a good time for the animals to arrive on the pasture. And what you need to do is give them enough rest so that whenever the animals come back, they're coming back at phase 2 again, right? Full regrowth. Now it's like you've got all this forage out there. And sometimes I've had some producers who will go, oh my gosh, I'm turning the cattle out from it. I'm moving them away from this pasture and there's still so much grass left. That's the idea. If you don't leave grass, you won't ever have grass. There's a producer raises grass-fed cattle in Virginia. His name is Gil Yearwood. And he really brought this to mind for me whenever he said, I think it was like last year, he said, if you don't leave grass behind, you'll never have grass. You always have to have that grass there, covering the soil, intercepting light, photosynthesizing with enough root mass underneath the soil surface to be able to allow for that plant to fully recover. So that's when they should arrive. Now, how about how long should they stay and when should they return? If you look at the graph on the left, if the animals were to arrive at that stage right there at about the beginning of phase 3, when you're starting to get into the elongation and reproductive stage, but if you were to leave them in there so that the grass is all the way down back in phase 1, which is vegetative, which we tend to do a lot, because we figure we want to get all the grass off there we can, well, then that again is going to set up that situation where you just are not going to have enough grass whenever you come back to it. Instead, what we want to do is enter whenever we're in about phase 2, that elongation and maturity stage, and then leave at the beginning of phase 2, which is this period right here. this period right here with it, where it just begins to elongate, right? That plant height, that plant structure is what we're looking at for whenever we leave. Then we're going to have lots of leaf matter there. Then we're going to have the ability to regrow, which is everything that we want. Okay, so whenever we look at this, we can see that having some type of a grazing plan is going to benefit us by having grass available, right? That's the whole point. We want to have forage available for our animals. But one of the things that it does is it does provide the highest forage production and use per acre over any type of grazing system, right? And I'm particularly comparing a rotational grazing system to a grazing system that is more continuous, where the animals stay on there. You'll have the highest forage production because you are allocating that forage whenever it's at the right stage, and then bringing animals back whenever that paddock is fully regrown. So you're getting several opportunities throughout the grazing season for that grass to regrow, right? In a continuous grazing situation, the grass is just never going to have a chance to fully regrow. And then as those roots get depleted, that's when we see some of these weeds come in, these opportunists who are coming in because the grass and the forages and the good forbs and the clovers, their root systems have been so compromised that now they're not sucking up nutrients. Other invasives will come in and will do it. And then, that's a case where people have to go out and buy a gallon of something they don't want to, that costs money, right? And spray the pasture to kill the weeds. And you might be killing the weeds, but still that's not making the grass grow, right? But we can make the grass grow by having a rotational system. One of the things that I mentioned earlier on, whenever I started the talk, was that the stocking rates can be increased. And we've actually seen this happen. I mentioned that it was possible to go from about 26 or 30 head up to about 75 or 76 cows just by making your paddocks smaller and increasing the number of paddocks you have. Stocking rates can go up because the productive potential of that pasture is there. With this grazing system, we're just allowing that potential to be expressed, right? And so then we can actually increase those stocking rates. And that, of course, means added income. That enterprise is making you more money, more gross income spread out over pretty much the same resources, means a higher net income as well. So that's one of the other benefits of developing a grazing plan. I didn't talk about distribution of manure and nutrients yet, but this is certainly true. There's been some research out there that has looked at, and this is where graduate students come in really handy, going out and counting manure patties, right? But there's some research out there looking at continuous grazing versus various types of rotational systems with few paddocks, maybe 4 paddocks, and then maybe 10 paddocks, and then maybe 20 paddocks, right? And what we've found pretty consistently is that the more paddocks that we have in our grazing system, the more even distribution we're gonna get of manure. And what that means is a more even distribution of nutrients. So much of the nutrients that come in through the mouth of a cow go right back out the back after they've been processed in the form of this manure, in this organic matter that in turn feeds those soil microorganisms and keeps the system going, right? So we know this. But more paddocks means a more even distribution. How many of you have seen, like, one pasture, a 50-acre pasture with maybe 25 or 30 cows on it that stay out there all year? You can actually go and point to where the manure patties are going to be. They're going to be all around the salt. They're going to be around the water. They're going to be underneath the shade. And you're not going to have as much manure patties out in the pasture where it can do the best good, right? So this helps us to distribute our nutrients around as well, and reduce the need for nitrogen fertilizer, which is an incredible benefit from grazing planning. Weeds and brush are usually controlled through grazing. So my wake up story, okay, whenever I was a cooperative extension agent in Southeast Texas, um, I, I, I was, working with a lot of producers trying to deal with weeds in their pastures and hay fields and, how to grow more forage. And I really didn't know, anything about rotational grazing until one of our forage specialists took all of us agents out on a professional development day, and we went to a grazing operation in Central Texas. He had one of those classic wagon wheel setups. You know what I'm talking about? You look at it from an aerial view, and the fences and everything are look like in the shape of a wagon wheel. And in the center of the hub of the wagon wheel was the water source. And so what this farmer was doing was he was just rotating those animals every couple of days through those pie sections of that wagon wheel, right? Same concept as what we set up here with Piney Woods, but it was all just kind of efficient. That way they had a single access to water in the center of the hub. And I'd never seen that before. And I was pretty floored. And just talking to the farmer, I said, well, what do you do about weeds? And he said something that shifted my attention and set the course of my career for the rest of my life. And he says, the weeds aren't a problem anymore. And that was really, that hit me like a punch in the face, because I was dealing with so many people who had weed problems, who were figuring out spray regimes, how to spray the weeds, how to replant. We'd go in and try to replant, Bermuda grass or something just to get forage productivity. All of that money, all of that time, all of those resources going into something that we really didn't have to if we were to allow the cattle to do the job for us. So what I did was I had a good friend and a rancher there in my county, and I went to him and I said, hey, I went and saw this rotational grazing system. What do you think? Are you interested in giving this a try? I'll help you maybe, and I'll document it, and we can just explore, right? We can just experiment here and see what this is made of. See if two goofy guys like us can make this happen, right? And he said, sure, yeah, I'll do that. That'd be great. So we took about 3 or 4 acres, and we planted ryegrass. This was in the fall. So we planted ryegrass and white clover, and we had about 24, 26 Brangus heifers. And once that was up and established, we turned them in, gave them about a day, sometimes 2 days per grazing period, then moved them. And our paddocks they were long and narrow, only 3 acres, but each paddock was small. I had enough to give 30 days of rest between each grazing period. We did not feed hay to those heifers all winter, right? Just a little bit in the barn, just to kind of, because if cattle are eating like ryegrass and clover in the fall and in the spring, whenever it's really going, they can get runny. They need a little pasture. And that changed my mind right there. I said, this stuff can work. And not only that, but the dock that was out there, because dock is a weed, just comes up like in the pastures everywhere down there. And what I noticed about the dock, the curly dock, was that all the leaves are stripped off in every single paddock. Those heifers went in there and they stripped all the leaves. And I was asking somebody one time, it's like, why does this happen? Animal scientist, and he says, well, it's because you bunch the cattle up, right? You kind of crowded them a little bit, so it took away their instinct to just kind of go and seek and choose what they wanted. They figured, it's like, here's my plate, I gotta finish it. So they ate the weeds, they ate the clover, and they ate the ryegrass. And I was sold. And from then on, I've been an advocate of some type of a managed system where we're managing time, right? We're managing how long animals are on a pasture and allowing for full regrowth. I said that it may reduce the need for hay. And we certainly saw it there. And I know many practitioners who have cut down significantly on their hay feeding just through controlled grazing, right? And if you add stockpiling to that, if you hold out a couple of paddocks in the late summer and let that mature, that can be grazed rotationally throughout the winter too. So you've got hay standing out there and you don't have to go, cut it, bale it, pick it up, take it to the barn, go back to the barn, take it out of the barn, and take it to the cattle. It's just there, right? That's an awesome way to do it. And then I mentioned ease of movement, and another benefit that comes from this is, of course, ease of livestock movement. That's because you're out there more, right? They see you more. They tend to become more docile. They're expecting to be moved, so they're waiting. It's like, okay, where's Lee? It's time to open the gate, and they're all there. They're ready to go. And then they trot through, and they become adapted to that. They become used to that, and so it really increases our ability to move animals safely, and it gives us, like I said earlier, that time to be able to really observe the animals, right? Okay, so onward. If I can get this thing going. Here we go. So how do you do this, right? I mean, there's a process. You need to determine your carrying capacity. How much land do you have? What's the forage productivity? How long of a grazing period do I want? How long do I want my rest period? From that, how many paddocks do I get, and how big will they be, right? There's an awful lot of questions right there in this process, and I don't have the time or the ability, really over Zoom to be able to go into the details of that. But ATTRA does have a publication that you can access for free on our website, attra.ncat.org, called Pasture Rangeland and Adaptive Grazing. And in this, it goes into some pretty detail on like how to determine your carrying capacity. How do I figure out my grazing period? How do I calculate the number of paddocks, and then how do I adapt as I go? So that's just, I just have to say, there's no way I could talk about that over the course of this hour-long webinar, but this paper does it pretty good. And by the end of this presentation, I also am going to put my email address up. So if anybody wants to talk about it, you can email me. Maybe we can get on the phone, just kind of talk through some ideas, right? Things that are going on your property that you might be interested in doing. So the whole reason this is important, is in addition to just like the economy of what you're doing on the ground with your animals, is that grazing really builds soil health, right? It's all about biology, right? We're minimizing disturbance. We're maximizing biodiversity by having our animals out there and spurring up all of these other plants that are natural to the system. We've got pastures that are covered year round with living roots, and we've got those animals on there that are adding that biology. Very, very important to have animals on the land in this, and it just really completes the cycle, right? It's all about building the soil health, putting that biology back on the ground to feed those soil microorganisms that are driving the whole carbon and nitrogen and nutrient and water. You go into the soil and you dig up a clod of dirt and you start to look at it. What we're trying to build here, to build a sustainable livestock operation, is soil aggregation. And all that really means is the ability for the soil to stick to itself. And without biology, without microorganisms in the soil is not going to stick together, right? You'll look at this aggregate here and you can see those little strands of those are fungi. Those are fungi that are decomposers. Now you have microscopic fungi in there as well that produce chemicals that act like a glue, and it holds those aggregates together. And when aggregates are held together that way, now you have a space for the organisms to live. You have a place. You have sites within the soil profile for nutrients to cling to. You have pore spaces for water and air exchange, and it is a habitat for microorganisms. And without that, you're not going to have a healthy soil with good nutrient cycling. And animals really, really do that. Having good aggregation increases water infiltration. gas exchange, plant growth, right? Reduces your costs because you don't have to fertilize, right? And well-being, it makes you happier, right? Wow, this is really cool. I love being a farmer because it's, I'm building the soil and I have healthy animals and they're giving me a healthy income. So here's kind of what, aggregation looks like. You know, between like a low organic matter soil and a high organic matter soil. And if you look at the picture on the left, this is before water was added to either one of the soils, right? And they both look relatively the same. You see aggregation there, you have the little soil clods, right? But what happens if you wet them? This one, if you look at the picture on the right, the beaker on the left with low organic matter soil, that soil did not have any a good stable aggregate stability, right? That glues and things that are holding that together because there was no biological life in the soil. And so when you add water, what happens? That soil aggregate just collapses. And now you have mud. Now you have runoff, right? All kinds of things that will really prevent you from having a productive plants growing in a productive pasture. However, if you look at the high organic matter soil with lots of biological activity, same amount of water, and those soil aggregates held together. So we say that the soil has high aggregate stability, right? Even with all that water, the water went into those pore spaces and it didn't break them apart because they're held together by that biological activity. And that's what we're trying to do with animals. Animals will really allow us to do this on pastures. And here's why. We look at, let's say that we're going to have a catastrophic event is going to happen sometime on our farm. They happen all the time. It could be flooding, it could be drought, who knows what, right? Windstorms, tornadoes, whatever. If our soils are operating at peak performance with good aggregate stability and good biological component within the soil, whenever we have that catastrophic event, we're going to be able to rebound from that event much quicker with much less of an impact on our income, on our productivity, right? You'll see that that's that gray line at the top. We hit that catastrophic event, we go down a little, but we're able to come back up because we've built resilience into the system, right? This works. This works with drought. This works with flooding because that soil is a sponge and it's going to hold whatever water it has. But if we don't have good aggregate stability, there's no stability, there's no resilience. And so it takes a much longer time to build back up to the point where we can be productive again. So that's why I like to talk about grazing as like a way to heal the land. And it really does work. Grazing is one way to do that. There's other things that we can do. You remember I said earlier that it's pretty simple to change the composition of our pastures by grazing. But also, we can go in and do some more proactive things as well. We need legumes in the pasture, right? Well, they can be frost seeded in the winter, where you just broadcast seed, maybe 4 or 6 pounds per acre, something like that. And you do this whenever the soil freezes and thaws in the spring, and it tends to work that seed down into the soil so that it'll germinate in the spring. And if you're in an area where you're not getting frozen soils, you can trample that in with livestock, right? I always recommend people to do this with legumes and things, clover, such, because grass seeds are a little bit harder to do. I mean, annual ryegrass is one of the only grasses that I know of you can throw it on concrete and it'll sprout, right? But most perennial grasses, they're more difficult to frost seed. I would much rather drill those in place. But for legumes, this works really well. And then, of course, you can also augment your pastures with fall cool season annuals, right? You can graze hard, come in September, graze really hard, broadcast ryegrass and clover. 20 days later, you've got a stand, right? Given enough water and temperature. This is something that works well in the humid South, as long as we have a decent rain to get that germinated. Another thing that you can do, I was thinking, how do you augment these pastures? Well, silvopasture is another, and I could talk for hours about this. But silvopasture, and I was thinking here on this one, on this plan, it could possibly be this woods up here between paddocks 9, 10, 11, and 12. Where we could do some strategic plantings, we could utilize some of the plants that are in there and graze intentionally in the forest, right? If you look at this graph right here, the green graph is basically your cool season forage graph, right? So your cool season grasses come up. Well, if you allow animals into the woods intentionally for restricted periods of time to perhaps apples, mulberries, honey locusts, things like this, black locust, things with pods, with mast, even fodder trees like poplars or mulberries, willows, things like this can actually reduce the need for hay during these periods because they are providing these materials whenever you're at a low point of your forage availability. Lots to be said about silvopasture. Please email me if you want any more information on that. We can talk about that for hours. So really remember, the things you need to remember as a grazer going into this is, think about how does grazing affect that plant, right? How does it affect the soils and the livestock at the different growth stages that those plants have? And knowing that, when should my livestock arrive on a pasture? How long should they stay? And when should they return? And I'll say right now that they should never return until that plant's fully recovered, right? That's the goal we're looking for. Lots of resources. I mentioned attra.ncat.org/livestock. There's some good publications you can look at on paddock design and fencing and water systems, writing a grazing plan, and then grazing multiple species together. So that's the quick story. Lots to talk about. I'll certainly take any questions. There's my email address if anybody's ever interested in getting in touch with me. But thank you, Felicia, for inviting me on. And I hope I didn't go over too long, but this is fun.
No, you did not. And I appreciate all that you have shared with us. It's just a wealth of information. And again, we are here. So when we do webinars, we're introducing you to concepts, ideas, tips, tricks of the trade that a lot of us have gone through as farmers. And so don't think you're going to get everything in a webinar. We're here every single day to assist you. So just reach out to us via many platforms. So we do have our chat function. You could call in, and then the resources on our ATTRA website is extensive. So you'll get a lot of information there. And if you run into some issues, that's when you call us up, email us to get it explained a little bit clearer. But Lee, thank you so much for that. We appreciate it. And at this time, I wanted to bring on our next speaker and then push our Q&A at the end, if that's okay with everyone. I wanted to introduce Miss Cynthia McCalister, and she is with Quality Saps, and I will let her introduce herself and give more information about her company. But the purpose of her being here is to introduce the level of mobile technology for farm businesses. We tend to not think about that, how to push our businesses out there, because yes, as farmers, we are businesses. A lot of us don't take heed to that. And so Ms. McCalister will be sharing that with us today, just a platform that can assist us with our business. Take it away, Ms. Cynthia.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Felicia. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my contact information in the chat, and I want you all to be able to access that as I am talking, and also get some time with me so we could talk further about how we could support you. So I'm going to share my screen, and we'll go ahead and talk about how we can further grow your business. All right. So first of all, I think everyone should be able to see my screen. So let me start by introducing myself. Again, I'm Cynthia McCalister. 2007, so 16 years ago. And I've been working in IT for a very long time. The mission for my company is really to support the growth of small businesses and do positive things in the community. And we leverage mobile technology and affordable programs to do that. So what we specialize in is the website development, mobile application development. We do business branding and marketing and IT consulting. The program that I'm going to speak to you all about is a program I established in 2016, which is called KeySpot, and our KeySpot Business Partners Program. And it is with business owners all across the country, and we are connecting communities. So first question I have is, how many of you, we already established you as business owners, how many of you also have products? You could use the raise your hand emoji if you want to just raise your hand about that. And if you do have products, the question is, how are you getting your products out there and how are you getting your business out there? In addition to owning an IT company where we're helping to support businesses, I'm also the author of a book about marketing your business. And when it comes to your business, it's so important to have that mobile presence. There are over 4.3 billion people in the world who own smartphones. And with that, people are using their phones to connect, to share, to be able to promote. And if you don't have your business within a mobile app platform, then you are missing out on connecting with people and making additional growth for your business. Now, maybe you might have thought, oh, well, let me go ahead and build a mobile app. But a lot of times people don't realize the expense that comes with building the app, marketing the app, and then maintaining the app. Sometimes that's out of people's reach. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to create the mobile application platform KeySpot, because we've covered all that cost. And what we're here to do is provide that platform for you to share your information. So whether it's just sharing information about your farm or sharing your products, we could do that for you by putting your information on our mobile platform. The way it works is we would be able to use your logo or an image, the description of what you have to offer, your website, your contact information, and then that is able to be on the app and people can find you. So that's how the app works. And this is what it looks like. So when people download the mobile app, they are able to do a quick search. They're able to do a keyword search within a radius. And once they see those results, then they could select the details. And that's where you see an example here. So maybe you're a farmer, but you sell, let's say you want to do jams, jellies. Maybe that's part of what you do at your farm. Well, you can include that on our KeySpot app, showing your products, showing your online store, and people will be able to share that information. People will be able to go on your online store and purchase from you. Or maybe you're just a farmer who maybe decides that they want people to come and do tours or just be having that presence that you're out there. People could still find you in that way. So there's lots of different ways we could leverage your business on this app. Now, remember what I said earlier. It's so important for you to have a website. And I'm hoping that all of you have websites to showcase what you are offering as a business. But if you don't, being part of our program, we actually give you discounts when it comes to website development. So one of the great things about our KeySpot Business Partner program is we not only put you on our mobile app, we're going to help promote you on social media. We're going to give you opportunities to network. If you noticed in the chat, there's actually a networking event we have this Thursday. It's another opportunity for you to connect with other business owners, and it's free and it's virtual. In addition to that, business referrals. We always have people looking for products, or if you need a service, we could connect you. And finally, as I mentioned, with our program, we offer discounts when it comes to websites. So if you don't have one, no worries. We can help develop one for you and give you a discount for that. Now, the great thing about our program, we want to make sure that no one is left behind. So we make it so affordable. It's free for 1 month. So you could be part of our KeySpot program. We'll be able to be your partner in business and help you in the areas that you need. And that's one of the reasons why I say, let's have a one-on-one so I could really understand what your needs are. What are your goals so we can help get you there. And then again, when you go to our website, keyspot.com/free, that's where you register. After that 1 month, it's only $15 a month. It's a subscription, but with that, we are your partners to help you grow your business and get you the resources you need. So I will go ahead and pause right there. This is just an example of some of our key spot business partners across the country. And here's my contact information along with the information in the chat so we could connect. So Felicia, I'm gonna stop sharing and I will throw it back to you.
Thank you so much, Miss Cynthia. At this time, I just wanted to open it up for any questions, and this is for both speakers. So do you have any questions for Lee or Cynthia at this time? You can either unmute yourself or you could place your question in the chat. Okay, at this time, I don't see any questions. Miss Cynthia, I wanted to ask, for a farmer that just don't do the internet, how would this benefit them if they just like, I don't really do that, but I do want my business to grow? How could you help that type of business owner?
Well, we have that type of business owner in our network already. There's lots of people who are not tech savvy, but that's why we're here. So even if you never download the app, your information is out there. So we are still promoting you. Even if you never go on social media or go on Facebook, we're still promoting you. So you have that partner who's getting your information out there, whether you're tech savvy or not. And the key thing for us is the importance of connection. So we will stay connected to you, connected by checking in on you every month, giving you these opportunities to have the virtual meeting so we could at least see your face, ask your questions, introduce you to other people. So that's the main thing. Just stay connected if you have any questions, if you have any needs. But if you're not tech savvy, you don't have to worry about it. We have you covered.
That's great. And then Lee, I have a question for you. We know we're working with farmers that are getting up in age. And so I know it's several programs. Well, I know at least one in the South, but then what about the farmers that may not be physically able to move these fencing for their animals? Do we have like a mobility entity out there that can assist farmers that may not be physically able to do this type of system?
Well, the first people that comes to mind whenever we talk about accommodations is agribility, right? I mean, that's kind of like the space they work in. Usually most state extension services has some type of agribility endeavor, where they're kind of assisting farmers with access issues and such, right? So it's always something, because I mean, even a lot of the beginning farmer trainings that we do, we'll always have a couple of people who have limited mobility, right? And so it makes us think about like even whenever I'm on farm tours with some participants with limited mobilities and such, it makes me think about layout. It makes me think about things like four-wheelers and such like this. I mean, I know people who put these fences on just without ever getting out of a four-wheeler, just by being able to stake them in as they drive by and run the wire out with a spool, right? It always helps to have somebody, to have somebody there with you, of course, a family member, a hired person, or whatever. But this, with that is something that is that I would have to think a little bit more deeply about. But I know there are ways to go about it, right? Because you're developing your pasture layout based upon your access issues, right? And I would be very interested to see if there's funding out there for farmers as well, right? That would be able to help with, purchasing vehicles, or helping with training, or even doing things on the farm with lanes and fencing and such like that. So that's a really good point.
I
Really is.
appreciate that, Lee, because I was thinking that funding, because we need the tools of the trade for the farmers that are getting up in age, which you spoke of, four-wheelers, the tracks, like I've seen wheelchairs on tracks where that can
Yes.
be,
Oh,
yes,
those are game changers.
they are, because I think it's interchangeable, but if not, it's an actual wheelchair on tracks, which you don't have a mobility issue when you're in your pastures. But again, for safety reasons, you need to have someone with you and so
Sure.
forth. But I would love and hope it is monies out there that can assist families with that to continue, so that farmer can continue to farm.
And just think about what a game changer that would be for that
Yeah.
farmer to be able to have a tracked wheelchair to go out there and actually, I mean, you know, fiberglass posts are very light. You can
Yes.
just plant them, you know,
Yes.
you can
Yep.
plant them, you know, and polywire, you know, is pretty light too, you know, just it's just about,
Exactly.
it's just some figuring out a system. But yeah, I'm glad that you got my brain working that direction, Felicia.
That's how we work, Lee. We always thinking
Sure.
about our farmers and want the best for them. And I just appreciate you both because you're sharing opportunities. This webinar is for new and beginning farmers, of course, but I experienced livestock producers that may just have went up against a little snag and don't really know how to set up their system. You have to have a plan. We always know that if you don't plan, you potentially could fail. So we know that saying, and that's why Lee is here to explain it. One of the things that I did not share, and I apologize, this webinar is for the Piney Woods School in Central Mississippi. We are working with them and another entity on a project with Natural Resources Conservation Service. So this webinar is really to share what they're trying to do to better their pastures at the school, because the school really started in an agriculture confines. That was how they started, because they were able to feed the students. And so we're trying to keep that there, bring it back and so forth. But then also schools that do this around the country, they could see the potential. They could see the potential to bring agriculture back on their property and be able to utilize it as a sustainability piece for their school students as well as the staff. So first and foremost, want to give homage to who we're helping, and that's Piney Woods School in Central Mississippi. And then also Miss Cynthia is sharing an opportunity. We know that business, that being out here in the social media world, it takes it by storm, and we can move our businesses from 0 to 100 very quickly on the social media platforms. But if we don't have the expertise, we have to hire people to help. And so that's why Miss McCalister is here. She is one of many, but I was just glad to be able to meet her. And then she's open and willing to work with farmers. That's another thing you have to take in consideration. All entities don't know how to work with farmers. And so you have to make sure you're working with a organization that's open enough to understand and learn what farmers need. And Miss Cynthia opened up her heart and her business to figure that out. We are a business, but we have a lot of moving parts, and she's willing to work with us to bring that to the forefront. So again, Ms. Cynthia, thank you. Lee, thank you. I appreciate it. And please know that this will be on our YouTube channel. It is NCAT ATTRA YouTube channel. It'll be there probably in the next 2 weeks, but please go and review this video if you missed anything. And thanks for joining us today. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Felicia.
Felicia. Bye.